Good afternoon. My name is Matt Worden. My presentation is a little more heads down, practical, using some tools. So I got super excited when Jonathan used the phrase that tools give you something to be creative with, and that's the whole idea of what this presentation is about. So I will say the story that when you did your first month of the 10 years of monthly game design, I remember seeing that and thinking, this will be fun to watch for a year. And then like 8 years later, I'm like, he's still going. So that was pretty amazing stuff. But I put this presentation together because over the years, I'm a big fan of multi-use cards. I've used the Game Crafter, and as soon as Component Studio was available, I started using that because otherwise it was me in Photoshop. I've switched away from Photoshop since then, but it was like, oh, that should be a 3 on those 18 cards of the 72 cards I've developed. And it just became a pain to do it over and over again. So I was looking for, I looked through a lot of like macros and automation in graphics software, and for me, Component Studio just really hit that sweet spot between something that gives me a lot of flexibility, but it's really easy to use. Super quick to change numbers. The designing with a percentage of a deck in mind, also love that slide. I'm just going to use half of Jonathan's slides for my stuff. Because what it does is, especially when you're early in a design, you're like, you know what, this game will work with 48 cards, and then you play it and you're like, we're running out of cards. We need 64 cards. Now I've got my numbers down, and again, I'm looking for a way to very quickly, how do I stand up these tools? So I'm going to give a lot of on-screen switching between the different tools, and I'm going to try to not dwell too deep into any specific tool, but more to show you the workflow I use to get from a spreadsheet through Component Studio to the Game Crafter. For what I'm going to show is a very niche case, but what I really want to do is kind of make you think about what you can do creatively with this setup. So to get a gauge of how much time to spend on each of these things, I do not have an online poll, but that was a really good way to go this morning. I'm just going to look for a show of hands. How many of you consider yourselves moderate or above use of spreadsheets, either Excel or Google Sheets? It's about half. That's what I was expecting. It's hard to be a game designer without playing in spreadsheets at some point. I always tell my wife that's the sexy part of game design is, look, I've got a spreadsheet up, and that'll be two days of work for me to figure out all my cards. How about Component Studio? Who's used Component Studio? Okay, and how many people have used the Game Crafter to do a deck with randomized deck output? Couple. So that's the direction I expected. So that's good. So my agenda, again, it's to spark kind of an idea of what can you do, and I'll just show you what I have done. And actually, we're just going to kind of build one while we're in the middle of this presentation, just to kind of get into it. So we'll do a quick walkthrough of the rules. I'll describe the use case. We okay, Tavis? Okay. I'm going to give a couple of specific examples that I've done already. And then our last thing is I'm going to build out something I'm calling the CrafterCon Adventure Party Pack. So, all right, I've kind of gone down this line with some of my games of where I want to have, maybe I don't know exactly which cards I'm getting, but I want to take those cards and build something out of the cards. And so for me, that opens you up to something like a set of cards that can be people or items, where each card is very unique in some kind of combination of stats or traits. And I'm going to get a randomly generated pack, either in like your 18 card pack, or maybe the game shows up with 54 cards, but your 54 cards might be different than my 54 cards when we get the game. And we're going to use that to put things together for a purpose. So for me, where that's landed for most things, it's been sports games. So I've done 2 examples I'll be going through is a dice-based football game where you build a team. Like I was explaining earlier, I wanted a game where it's like fantasy football level thinking, where the games play fast and really the energy goes into how do I assemble my team, how do I put my game plans together, things like that. The other area I thought about is having a role-playing game or an adventure game where you just have an assembly of people that you're going to put together in a party. So that's going to be the example that we build out. All right. The process I use is Component Studio 2 greatly improved their dataset editor, but it doesn't do super complex things like spreadsheets can. So I always start with either Excel or Google Sheets. It depends a lot on if I care to share it with other people or if I'm just working on my laptop. That's really it. So I use Excel and work every day. So for me, Excel just kind of pops up sometimes when I open up my laptop. So that's my go-to. The important thing is that at the end of it, you're going to have a set of data that you're going to export into the CSV format, comma separated file, value file. So if people have used spreadsheets, used data, you're familiar with that CSV. It's just essentially just a standard way of putting data together in a standard format. I use Component Studio for the data set. I import that CSV. I use CS to design my cards and generate all of the cards I might want. So in the case of the example we're going to use, we're going to be building an 18-card random pack. We're actually going to design 180 cards so that we put 180 cards into the game crafter and we say pick a random 18, and that will give you that mix. So that's just the numbers I'm picking for this example. And then the random deck setup in the game crafter is the last piece. And so I'm going to show a couple ways I've handled that as well. And the thing that makes this all really work well is that Component Studio exports directly into the game crafter. So once you've set your game up, you can tell it, delete that deck and now load all these cards as that deck. All right. The main reason for a spreadsheet is to be able to do random number generation. It's probably 90% of what it's needed for, and also do other formulas to be able to look information up or put information together, get to that. I use it a lot of times when I'm balancing my deck to get to those values. Jonathan, slide one more time. When I put in my values for how strong is this person's attack, how strong is this person's strength, and then I have usually a summary number that says that card is worth this, and I use those columns to balance out my deck. Oh, I have way too many magic users. I don't want that many magic users. We'll tweak those numbers, things like that. And then I'm going to give a couple of the common tricks that I use generally in my spreadsheets. So, all right, dice, 2d6, closest thing you can get to a bell curve and two little components, right? You're going to hit on 7 most of the time. This is the graph that comes up if you're using 2d6s. In the same vein, in a spreadsheet, I use a lot of rand between with two numbers. And so in this case, I'm just creating a couple of rand betweens from 0 to 4, 1 to 5, and getting a sum, and this is the graph I get. If you can keep refreshing this, you're going to not get a perfect bell curve, but it's going to give you what you want. So if you ever are trying to have a range, but you really want it to be bell curvy, two values added together is going to do the trick in a lot of cases. So kind of a quick little trick there. The other thing I do a lot of is random numbers with a VLOOKUP. So this is kind of getting into the weeds with Excel. There's VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP, XLOOKUP, right? They all have a different way to them, but essentially what it lets you do is take a value, go to another table of information, grab that value, and find something else and bring it in. And so the examples I usually use are if I want to give somebody a name, or in this case, the example I've done is I've set up 6 directions. So if I want a card to give you a direction to move something, maybe there's a semi-automated monster that's chasing you and you want it to follow the hex map, you could set up this 1 through 6 table on the left here. This is my reference table, and then a random number generator, and then the VLOOKUP to say which direction do I want to say that is. So it lets you use numbers and then turn them into words, turn them into things like that.
card, let's say the monster action, all the monster action cards.
Right.
Okay, awesome.
So in that case, let's say again, I use multi-use cards quite a bit. So maybe the card is a deck of items, but when it's time to move the monster, you flip over the next 3 items and use this corner value that tells you which way to move the monster.
Cool.
So, yeah.
For the ADD liberal arts major, where do I find out how to do the formula things that you're doing? Because right now you're speaking another language to me.
That's why I'm trying to blow through it really fast. Go ahead.
As someone that taught myself, Google it. If you just Google VLOOKUP, there's all kinds of like just intro level spreadsheet knowledge on there. It'll teach you how to like give examples, all that stuff.
I also throw in the words Excel tutorial term.
Yes, or
So-
spread or sheets if you're using Google Sheets.
Yeah. So I've had to look some of this stuff up. The last piece will be whenever I want to do a development, and I'm going to show you some examples of where I've got, for example, football players whose stats change over their career. Typically, people get better until their bodies don't let them, and then they get worse. That's kind of how that's typical career track. And so what I usually use is a plus a random number minus a random number. And you can weight those, whether you want that to be mostly going up or mostly going down, while adding enough random flexibility to it. So the example I did in my spreadsheet here is this dev curve. So I don't even know what skill we're talking about, but I have a starting skill. It's just a random number. And then in year 1, it's going to be more likely to be positive than negative until the last section there. So the whole idea here is that.
Can you turn that into a card?
Yeah.
A series of cards? I'm really
Yep.
interested to see what
Yeah.
this looks like.
So it's just so that at the same, all I'm doing is saying, give me a random number that I'm going to add and a random number that I'm going to subtract, and then I just change over time, how good is the positive and how strong is the negative. The other one that I kind of skipped over, but I'll do this. This is very similar to looking up a name. It's when you have a distribution that you want that isn't really easily figured out with just a random number or a bell curve. In this case, I'm just doing a 1 through 9 on my random number, but then I want, the first 4 to be a 1, and then a couple of 2s and a 3 at the end. So if I want more of a slanted distribution, it's another way to go, is to use the VLOOKUP with your own distribution in it. So we'll get to real life examples. So I know I'm talking theory a lot here, so we'll blow through that and keep going. Quick review of Component Studio. I think we had about half the hands have used it. You'll see CS or CS2. They moved from version 1 to version 2 in the past couple of years, and so you can still access both. But I know the original CS1 will be going away, and I've moved all my stuff to CS2 now. So if you hear that CS2, I'm really talking about Component Studio. And the whole purpose of it is to take a design template, bring in your data, have the template do the heavy lifting of turning that into graphics that change per card. So there's a monthly fee. It's a web software. Someone mentioned it earlier today. I'm one of those people that'll just tell you it's worth it. If you're doing card design on a regular basis, when you get past this step where you're printing out your own cards, and you're just like, I really want my first good set. I'm going to ProSpiel. I want them to deal with some good cards. I get into this pretty quick.
Can you print and play with it too, though?
You can. In fact, thank you. The advantage, I'm going to give a quick visual tour of here. I love it. Okay. So everything in the game, this is Component Studio here. If I go back to the home page originally, it comes up like this. You can still access CS1 if you still have things in there. I was encouraged, thanks Alicia, to move to CS2, so I did. Everything is organized around a game. So within a game, you can have a bunch of data sets, you can have a bunch of designs. And so the game we're going to be working on today is called this CrafterCon Adventure Party Pack. Data sets would be those spreadsheets worth of data that you would bring in. You can go in here and edit it yourself, right in the grid itself, but it has a nice CSV import, so I'm always do it in Excel, export it CSV, import it into here. The neat thing about this is you can have multiple data sets for the same thing. And the example I'll be showing in a little bit is with my football players. I have offensive players, I have defensive players. Same exact columns and everything, but I wanted to be able to say, I want to export just offensive players this time. Then I want to export just defensive players. And so you're able to have these multiple data sets and then on your design point to which data set you want it to be using. So quick look at designs, for example. Got a couple of them open here. In the design, and again, when we build this out, we'll get into what all this stuff is over here, but basically, when you are looking at your design, you're able to say, please, to point it at a specific data set, and if you want to switch between data sets, it'll show you which one you're looking at on screen here. And then the last thing is, once you're in, you can do an export, and this is, Nicole had mentioned, there's a lot of formats that it can export to besides just pushing things into the game crafter. So it does a print and play PDF, it does a 3x3 lineup of that. There's some options around whether you want cut lines, what color the cut lines are, things like that. But it has that format. It can go to the game crafter. It can create the cache for Tabletop Simulator as well. So if you're trying to bring your deck into Tabletop Simulator, very quick way to build up that graphic cache for them to use. And then the last one, which we use a lot of times, or I use a lot of times for getting the cards out to just use in generated displays or any type of thing I want to use graphically, is the zip of all of the JPEGs of your files. So, or they come out as PNGs, I think. But basically, it creates a image file of every card in your deck and puts it in a zip file for you to download. So, really handy.
That's a quick question.
Yep.
About the Tabletop Simulator, so they will host the images for you also?
That I'm not sure of.
Okay.
Anyone have an answer to that one who's done it? Yeah, I don't know. I think it does get stuck on an AWS.
Tabletop Simulator, I think when you create a Tabletop Simulator mod, you actually push it up to Steam. So I think they're all
yeah.
saved on Steam.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's right.
I've seen mods break because people like put them on their Google Drive and then they delete it later or something.
Yeah.
I thought you had to host it, but maybe I haven't done it in a while, so.
Yeah, I haven't.
It's all hosted on Steam.
Oh, okay.
Okay. The question for people that couldn't hear was does the image, when it gets exported for the TTS cache, get hosted somewhere? And I don't know the answer to that, so we're going to look that up. Okay, and then the Game Crafter, which all of you have used, it seems, in the room, so I'm not going to go into much detail here. But the biggest thing is that the random card setup is what's important on a deck. So I just want to do a quick little show of that. When you first set up a deck, the setting on this will, right here, at the top of, this is just a normal poker deck in the Game Crafter, will say all cards. So that's the default, is you upload cards, whatever you upload will get printed when this deck gets printed. It has two randomized settings. One is just random cards, in which case it doesn't really care whether it's given that card already in the deck or not. So if you put in 20 cards here, you might get the same deck or same card 3 times if you choose this. In the examples I'm doing, I do want a unique set of cards of the 18 that I'm doing here. And so you would say random cards, no duplicates. Yep, go ahead.
So you use an example of 180 cards and you're getting a random selection of 18. Could you get, random selection of 5 or in the other number? You determine that?
Yeah, so that's determined right here in this class name and quantity setup. The original, this originally was set up before Component Studio began. So the idea would be for you in a trading card game, you would write your classes that you want and how many of each class you want to have show up. And then within each card in the deck, you say what is the class that card is. From working with Component Studio, it only ever sends everything over as common. So there's really not within Component Studio a way to modify this at all. You would have to kind of push that into the game crafter and then come in here and make all your changes after it's in here. But yes, you can pick any number. In fact, one of the examples I'll show, it's an 18 card pack. I have 3 decks. I take 2 from one deck, 8 from one deck, 8 from another deck, just to be able to get my mix that I want. And then I don't have to worry about this class setup. I can just work with common as my number, let everything come in as common, and it'll work together. So again, I'll show that here in a second. There is, you do want to, if you start going down this route, you want to read the FAQ that's about the card randomizer. The biggest thing here is because it's going to generate a unique deck each time a game is printed, you lose the advantages of bulk order. So if I order 10 copies of my randomized deck, it costs me the same per deck as my 1 copy. I don't get that 10 bulk reduction in cost. Same thing with using bulk order fulfillment. So if it's the type of thing where you're like, this is my plan, is to go to Kickstarter and send out use bulk order fulfillment to fulfill it, you're not going to get that benefit here if we use this. All right, so let me talk about a couple examples. One was, this was a contest entry from a few contests back. I think this was Meta Progression for those that were in that. I have a spy car racing game, and you have a crew. And the crew is a bunch of randomly generated crew members, and you end up actually in the main box, you get 54 cards, but it's going to be a different 54. I think I've made 600, something like that. But again, once you've got the spreadsheet work going, it's not much harder to do 600 as it is to do 5. It's once you've got everything figured out that you want along the way. So in here, all of these things I've got the arrows pointing to are different unique elements in my spreadsheet. Here's the spreadsheet. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in here, but I just want to kind of show you the process of doing this. I always start on row 1. I do everything I need on one row, and then I just copy and paste the formulas down, let it do its thing, and I look at it. Does that look right? Do I need to regenerate?
So are those columns all randomly, like GEH, those are randomly generated?
Yeah, I'll step through each one so you can see what it is. Yep. So F9 is your friend when you're working with random numbers, because when you hit it, everything regenerates. And so it lets you look at things. Another trick, and I won't go into the showing you this, but I always make more than I need, because in a game like football, you don't want a bunch of D-rated players. You want A through C rated players. So I will generate, if I need 200, I'll generate 300. I'll rank them in order, and I'll get rid of the last 100. I won't even bring it in. So yes, a couple of tricks I did here. I wanted names on people. So again, random number with some VLOOKUP. I have a source data table where I've got all my names with a number next to them. Just look that up. Everything else is generated through RAND between. So number of hearts would be essentially your health level for that person. Everyone has the same number of hearts in this game. It's just when do you get knocked out. So after eight hits, you're gonna not be part of the team anymore. I think it just means you went to find a farm out in the country, something like that. But there's a point in time where you go unconscious as a driver. So this is the type of thing where it's time to sub in a different driver because that guy's not driving the car anymore because he's out. Crew type, I went with 3 types. I went mostly a driver, mostly a mechanic, or the hybrid. You kind of do a little bit of everything. So all of the other ratings in here key off of what type of crew member is this. So if my crew is one type, then I up their driving capabilities, and if it's the other type, I up their crew capabilities and things like that. So as we work through each of these steps, I come up with a number, and then I have my grade that turns out. At the end of all of this, you get the data that goes into, glasses. Goes into my design in Component Studio. So I just want to kind of show you the hearts as the quick example here. There's the hearts, turn them off, turn them back on. But basically what this does is I take that number, that heart, number of hearts, and I repeat the icon of the heart for as many as I want to show up here. So it just, and then if I go from one player to the other, it's going to redraw that next player with the hearts the way they're shaped there too. So all of that stuff that was on the spreadsheet then shows up in here, and I'm able to generate every card I need and then export it into the Game Crafter. I want to kind of blow through these so I can get to the making our new party pack one. The other example is the football game I had talked about. This game traces the career of a football player over time, and there's every time you move from one segment of career to another, you're actually randomly choosing, do they get better, do they get worse? And so I needed a card that can kind of show all of that. And again, it's a lot of random number generation, a lot of using that VLOOKUP for our reference data, names again, which type of player they are, things like that. So again, this was, you start by what do I need in the game, what do I need to show on a card? I need a column for that in each case, and then how do I want to get to the results of that? In the example of the football player card, the biggest thing that that Component Studio lets me do is later on, as I was doing a couple iterations of the game, I'm like, okay, I want some players to be star players. I want them to be, there's some rules in the game that give you a little more leeway with your star players with the normal player. How do I designate that? So I came up with how do we add a star to this. I need to find my guy that's my star. I want to say it's Raymond. I could be wrong. Yep, he's a star. So now there's a star right here. And so in that, end up having a column added to my data that's called star that is actually calculated off some other things. I'm like, oh, is his rating above this level? Is he only good at one thing, or is he good at several things? And then there was one more kind of random component to be like, is this, from a personality standpoint, is this guy a star? And if so, then that column shows up as a 1. And so when we've got the player's name, there is a star item here in the header. And again, with Component Studio, you can add a criteria whether you even show that component. And so in this case, I have a column called star that's going to either be a 0 or a 1. If it's a 0, it won't show up. If it's a 1, it will show up. So, all right, let's get to the thing I want to build in the first place. Again, these are just some examples of what can you do, what is possible. Yep.
How long did it take you to set that up?
The spreadsheet took the longest, couple weeks to kind of come to exactly everything I wanted to have on it. Once I had the spreadsheet set up, a couple hours in Component Studio to get everything on screen. Yeah, had to do a lot of, because there's a lot of information. When you put a lot of information in a card, that's a lot of, when you look at the card, where do your eyes go? Do you actually pick up what you need to see in the moment in the game? So there was a lot of iteration, and that's really where, to me, Component Studio really shines, is when you print out your first couple and you start playing and you're like, wow, I can't even tell what that number is. okay, that number is the thing I look at on every play. I may need to make that really pop. So how do I make that look? Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out how much of this you play tested to tweak the numbers and the formulas
Mhm.
before you order. Did you just order like 7 different packs of cards?
No.
Like, how did you play test them with the random numbers, testing them out?
So the numbers needed to be within a certain range. So that's just because of the way I've designed the results of a play, for example. So I know I need in the range from A to B. The other thing is the example I gave before. In the football game, more than anywhere else, I generate more cards than I need, and then I get rid of a bunch that are just going to be bad.
I'm not expressing my question more. It's
Yeah.
more like I get the math is going to take some tweaking. I'm
Yeah.
guessing that it takes time to play test it and
To
then
see
say,
if
oh,
the-
I need to change this later on.
Yeah.
How did you generate the things you play tested? Did you
I downloaded the images and I printed them on my inkjet.
That's what-
Yep. Yep, sorry, I thought we were going a lot more theoretical, but no, I
Also liberal arts majors.
I will order once I feel confident that it's going to be worth putting in front of other people. So it's usually in going to an event like this, or if we're having a local design night or whatever, then I'll wait to do that. But a lot of my prototypes are a very cheap poker card in a card sleeve with the inkjet print thing in front of it. So I use that more than anything else. Alicia, I see a hand.
Yeah, just from earlier, CS, Components YouTube can host and you can download the file for tabletop.
Okay, cool.
So I just tried it, it gives you a PNG, you can log out and still access that PNG. So it wouldn't need any special permission.
Okay, so what Alicia just said is that from looking it up and testing it a little bit here in the background, when that cache gets generated for TTS, it is hosted, so you can use the link, or you can download it and then upload it into the Steam workshop. So, okay, others? Okay.
Similar to that, and I looked it up also, and when you're creating your tabletop simulator mod, it gives you the option of uploading your files or hosting them yourself.
Oh, okay.
And that's why so many of them is that people chose to host them yourself.
But then you don't give rights to everybody to use it? Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right, so this is going to be the example I'm just going to walk through. Time check quick. Half an hour? Oh, 20 minutes. I'm going to build this adventure party pack. I just went with 4 generic skills that I'm calling build, fight, talk, magic. I'm going to convert a 1 to 9 skill rating into a bunch of dice that you can roll. Little art notification from the Now project down here that I'm using polyhedral dice by Lonnie Tapskull. And I created 180 in a spreadsheet. So I'm just going to walk through the spreadsheet, kind of show you the examples I did, and then how I built out the Component Studio template for displaying the stuff. I gotta find my correct spreadsheet, so give me a second. You know, I brought up every spreadsheet but the one I want to show. Okay. Almost always, the first thing I build out is a reference table of what I need to be able to do for the different columns that I'm going to look up. And I just started a spreadsheet where I'm going to have these weird collections of a set of columns and rows that are going to be what I end up referring to on the actual data sheet. So in this case, I've decided we're going to have 6 types of different characters based on what's their specialty. And so since we have 4 skills, I just paired up the skills. And so you'll see builder fighter, builder talker, builder magic, etc. So, and then to the right is I'm giving the random numbers I'm going to use to determine what's the starting rating and how fast do they, and where do they end up based on which type of character it is. And so you'll notice that if they don't have magic in their name, I'm not giving them any magic at all. So only the magic users get magic. Again, just choices to be made here on how I want the game to play. It's a made-up game, so we can figure out how it's going to be played anyway. The last thing I knew I was going to do was to take, have skill levels between 1 and 9, and I'm going to want images of dice. So this is one of those things for getting used to working with Component Studio, is within your design, there are images that you store in Component Studio. They have a foldering system, and it is as simple as when you want to upload, you say add another image, you upload it, and it's hosted in Component Studio for you. Anything you want to refer to in your design has to be here, right? So it has to.
Is there a way to mass import if you have a lot of images?
You can drop as many as you want on here.
Okay, so you could just select like 20 images.
Yeah. Yep. When I brought my dice in, this isn't a lot, but I just grabbed them all and dropped them in here, and then I got my dice images. Yep.
And just, when I was using this, I regretted not having my naming convention figured out early on. Any suggestions on that?
Yeah. So two ways to go, and I went to me as the cheater route, and so I'll show that quick, and then I'll talk about if you didn't want to cheat, if you want to kind of do it with a good naming convention. Every image you put up here has a URL that is going to give your design the reference it needs to be able to show that image on screen. And so when I click on this copy, the clipboard, I can copy the height or the width or the URL. And so what I did is for each of my images back in my spreadsheet, let me get rid of all the spreadsheets I don't need anymore. For each image, I put my URL in as a lookup, so that when I'm back in my spreadsheet to generate the data, I say, what URL should I be using? And it looks it up. If you'll notice, it has a common way of naming your file. It is images dot your actual file name dot URL. So if you know that I'm going to name everything character 01, character 02, character 03, you can build this URL out without having to copy it out of Component Studio. But if you mix it up and don't get it right, then when it goes to show that image, it's going to actually give you an error. Like, I can't find that image. Or it'll show you nothing, one of those. So that's the way I've kind of gotten around it because I almost always just start making images and I don't think about naming convention, and then it's like, oh, I'm going to use that one and that one and that one. And then, so I've taken to making a table to say what images do I want for each of these types of numbers or whatever. Okay, back to my party pack. So then we start making character data. I just grabbed names. I just grabbed a list of names, 180 names, and put them in as my character name. You could do something much fancier to do a lookup or whatever for name, but I just found some randomly generated names and put them in here. Every data set, if you haven't worked in this, needs a quantity and a name. That's like the required two first fields in a data set for Component Studio. Quantity is how many of this card are you going to put in your deck. For a case like this, we're always going to put one of each card because it's unique. But if you are, let's say you're generating a deck of terrain and you're going to have your 12 plains and your 8 mountains or whatever, you can just do one row and say there's 12 of these in the deck, and it'll translate over. And then the name just has to be unique per row. So this is kind of the unique identifier for the data set to know that's the row you're talking about. When you're back in Component Studio to look at a specific result, that's what shows up here in this list, is whatever you put in the name column. So it's easy for you to say, oh, I want to see the way Angelica looks, and click on her row. All right, so I went through, I knew I was going to have 6 different character types, so I did a rand 1 to 6, ran between. It is inclusive of both those end numbers, so if you've used any other random generator or have written any other code in other languages, whenever you use a random number, it's like, are we including the full range? In ran between, it is. So it will give you a 1 through 6. I do a lookup back on my reference. And then I start by, based on what my character type is, what is my first year? So I've got 5 levels for each of the 4 things, 5 builds, 5 fights. And so the first one's going to be, back to our reference data, whatever this build low and high, or fight low and high, this is the first year random number for that first level. I'm calling it a year, it's really a level, if we think about it as an adventure game. And then after that, I do I'm going to kind of talk about the min and max here in a second. But I just keep assuming every time you go up a level, you have a chance of getting better in this area. And so I just do a random number 0 through 2 and add that to the previous level. And so you'll notice when I start showing the cards off, you'll get someone who gets stagnant and stays at that level or at that same skill number for a couple levels, and then it'll improve again. This is the way I did that here. The min and the max, you know why I did that, right?
Sorry.
I picked
I
the,
only got 2 hours of sleep last
I-
night.
I
I'm
picked-
here swimming
I
like
picked the CPA.
that. I'm not a CPA, I'm accurate.
CFO. Oh, there we go. Sorry. Anyway, min and max allows you to kind of pin things between 2 ends. So I'm saying the way this formula reads is take the smaller number between 9 and whatever my number is that I just generated. So if ever I get up above 9, it's going to keep me at 9. Same thing with the max 1. It's like take the biggest number between 1 and whatever I generated. The lowest number, no, the highest number between 1 and whatever I generated. So it's just a way to keep me between 1 and 9 on all of these. So at the end of all this, I get all these numbers for my rating number, but I want to convert it to that URL that we're seeing. So then I do all of my dice image lookups for the URLs here. So this is just, again, once I get that first row built, it really is copy the row, paste it down as much as you want, and now I've got a whole bunch of random characters to work with. Last step is I copy everything and I paste it to another tab and just paste values. So it's a way most spreadsheets have of saying, get rid of the formulas, there's no more random numbers in here, and now I just have actual real numbers and they won't move anymore. And I can export this as a CSV for use in Component Studio. Last thing I'll talk through here is how I built out the template in Component Studio. And then we'll have a little bit of time for questions and transition to the next talk. All right, so I wanted to pick a magic user just to show it off here. So background is the first thing you build. This is what do you want to show behind the image. I'm going to turn off everything else. Oh, background I need to leave on. Basically, I did 2 things. One is I just had a random texture. It's a bunch of sand. It seemed a little too dark, so I added an extra rectangle on top of it that is kind of a translucent white to just kind of fade it out. And that just gives me a background that's not pure white to give me a little bit of a feel. Right? Character ID, really there's 3 things I wanted to put on here. One is an image. I only have one default image for everybody at this point. But again, if you end up getting artwork done, you could dump all those characters, and that's where, to me, that naming convention is going to be super important, to be like, this is character 1's image, so that I can just refer to that URL and not have to go to that. And then I put in the text for their name and the type of character, again, just to show off, what are they. I originally intended to build an actual grid here, but I didn't. So what I did is just add headers into the top. So even though it says skills grid, it's just the names of the different, the level plus the skills. and then built my first row of skills. This is actually, to me, again, where once I got to this part, the rest of it took 5 minutes, because it's like building out this one row was the hard part. Then after that, I just kept copying the design for that. So I was able to do a couple things. One is you're able to group all your levels together and move the top of that group down. So my group actually starts right up here, right underneath the row. And then every layer I have, I don't really have to move. I can just leave the top at 0. And what that allows me to do is, as I move to my next level for skill build, is I can just keep moving. Let me turn that one on. Sorry. Level 2, when I put that in here, all I did was I copied this thing that was already built, and then I just adjusted all the numbers from 1 to 2 and made sure it was referencing the right columns. But the position itself just took care of itself. So it sat in aligned itself right underneath that. So again, once, the questions around how long does this take, a lot of times that first row, that first element, that first thing you're building out will take some time to get it right, make it look good. And then it's like, oh, I'm going to just do that 5 more times. And then I just did a copy, and then it was 5 minutes to touch up the references to the right columns. And then the last thing we did is to export that over into the Game Crafter and build out the deck itself. So that was the 18 cards you see here. And again, they get imported in. The imported process itself with CS2, this is a change. So if you've used it before CS2 and moved to CS2, the export process into the Game Crafter actually takes over your browser. And it says, don't touch anything, just let it do its thing. And it starts generating the cards on screen, and you kind of just let it run. And so for 180 cards, it took about 15 minutes or so to get through the whole run, to get everything pushed over. I think there's a point where it will, offload it to an off server and just say it's still running in the background. You can go back to work. But if it's for smaller decks, it'll do everything in browser. All right, that's the biggest. That's what I wanted to go through today. So I guess we got a few minutes before I shut down and turn it over to the next presentation. But yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to do a quick shout out for the folks that were wondering how you reach this level of Excel proficiency. W3 School's website is a very good place for just most technology learning things.
W3 Schools for learning things like Excel and other common business technologies.
They
Okay.
usually have in the web page examples you can work on and do it in
Yeah.
practice. And it's all free.
Yeah.
They have a paid version, but yeah.
And I will point out, I mean, if I went through every cell on every spreadsheet, I might have used 4 different functions. I used ran between, I used VLOOKUP, and then the min-max, or sometimes if you have to do some kind of fancy math on things to make things work out, that's about it. I mean, sometimes I'm doing averages or divide by with floors and things, but I mean, I don't think across all the spreadsheets I showed I've used more than 4 functions. So once you get to know the ones you need for game design, you'll look back like someone will be asking you in a year, hey, how do you do that? Yeah.
So, just for future, I would include one slide that says most common formulas for game design. Obviously you're done, and
Yeah.
I have anxiety when it comes to math, so this has been an interesting hour. But I mean, obviously it's amazing. I'll go back and I'll look up the things. Thank you for all of you who've offered help. I will look all that stuff up. But
Okay.
it's just something to improve the teaching process.
I'll actually, I'll do it right here.
Yeah.
I would just point out that actually, I mean, I use spreadsheets for game design all the time, and almost never use formulas. So like, just designing the numbers, right? Like, so I'm choosing the numbers deliberately. I'm not generating the Yeah,
I do use Excel to create, to basically identify my cards, but I
Don't do
I don't
the
know how to do
formulas. Yep. So when you're going to do your lookup, those are the four to me that'll give you the most mileage quickly if you're trying to do randomized stuff. In a lot of cases, when you're making a deck, you know exactly what you want to have in there. You don't want to be using random. You want to be using, I want this word, I want this number. I'm going to tweak these numbers as time goes on, but you're not trying to do formula.
Yeah, well,
But,
when I started with this most recent thing that I've been doing, I wanted to actually like attach values to things in cards,
Mhm.
but I didn't know how, and I didn't know who to ask, and the anxiety made sure that I wasn't gonna look for it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just didn't, and I just play tested, and it's worked.
Yeah.
But that would be quicker.
Yep. Oh,
I'm sorry, could you read those out loud?
sure. Rand between. Yeah, it's super small. Let me upsize them a little bit.
Do you want to explain what rand between is? Because I think that might be a little confusing.
Okay. Yeah. Good point. So let me say them and then I'll explain them. So rand between, VLOOKUP, and min max. Those are two different functions that kind of do the same thing. So rand between is a random number between, you give it two numbers. So if I do rand between 1 and 5, it's going to give you a random number from 1 to 5 on each row. If you don't like the number you like, you hit F9, it gives you a different number. So it's just going to keep generating. Actually, every time you type in your spreadsheet, it's going to regenerate those numbers. So until you say, I like that number, I'm going to make that my number and change it from the formula. If it says rand between, it's going to regenerate. VLOOKUP is a vertical lookup on a table. So you give it a value in the first column, and you tell it which of the columns you want it to bring back. And so you can make these beautiful columns that say, based on this one number, here's the 7 different things I want to reference, and you can pull it back. And then a min is just between two numbers, what's the smaller of the two numbers? A max is which of the two numbers is bigger. So, yeah, go ahead.
In terms of, you talked about generating 600 cards, like way more than you actually need, and kind of sorting through based on what the random generators create.
Yeah.
My question is about that sorting. Because I've worked with random number generators in Excel before, and it's like, yes, every time you touch something, everything in it changes.
Yeah.
So are you converting it to a static and then kind of filtering,
Yeah.
and then going back to the equations?
Yeah, usually when I copy, so the question was, the random number generators are going to regenerate every time you touch anything. If you're trying to generate more than you need and only keep the best, how do you do it? So I do that analysis after I've copied my results to static values on a next tab. And then I usually will add a column to give me my number that sums up my total value. So in the case of the football player, it's easy. It's like, in that middle column, which is the best of their career, what are their values all the way down? That's going to tell me how good of a player that is. And then if they're on the bottom third, I just delete those rows before I bring it in the Component Studio. Do you have some?
I'm curious because I've done something like with the images, going to that for a minute.
Mhm.
So I have my body gun, I have it on here.
Yeah.
And it's looking up different images, and I just have the file name in Excel, and I have the lookup formula in the image in Component Studio. Is there a
Yep.
reason why you chose one? I'm just wondering if maybe
Yeah.
I'm doing it wrong and I shouldn't do it that way.
No,
but maybe I'm doing it
yeah. So Nicole's point is there's usually 2 or 3 ways to do almost everything in Component Studio. So the way I'm showing, where you basically pick the URL of the image and provide that to Component Studio, and then it looks it up. The other way to do it is to use the image lookup formula and give it the name, and it'll return that same URL. Why did I do it one way versus the other? Probably because I just got used to working with the
Yeah.
image URLs. Yeah.
I just wasn't sure if maybe
Yeah.
this would cause a problem. It didn't seem to.
No.
Okay.
I think it's you'll find there's a lot of formulas, a lot of ways to get to the same result, and then you want to, if that result works for you and it's better for you, then go for it. Yeah. All right, one more and then we'll wrap. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in and call back to Jonathan's talk. There's also a lot of useful formulas you can use for analyzing your results, like count and filtering and stuff like that. So if you wanted to add those as well.
Oh yeah, good point. So Yep, the point is, when you're doing that analysis of how do your results look, there's other Excel formulas to use, statistical things around count, average, things like that, that would help you when you're analyzing what's the good rows to keep. So, all right, thanks everybody, appreciate it.